Welcome, everyone. My name is Alan Hurlbert, and I am a professor of biology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I am also the founder of this project, Caterpillar Count, which I'm going to be telling you all about today. So um, basically, what we hope to cover, oh, before I leave this screen, actually, um, I'll have folks take note of this tiny URL. You might want to write that down or open it in a browser. Um, I think it will be really useful for later on. It's both a summary and agenda of what we're going to cover today, but it also, in the future, it will be a helpful sort of table of contents, a helpful way to find resources about related to different parts of the things I'm talking about today. So go ahead and note that down, tinyurl.com, Caterpillar's webinar. And now we'll go ahead and get started here. So basically, over the course of this webinar, I'm going to explain what this project is about, why it started, what sort of problems it's hoping to address, what we've learned from the data collected from this project so far, and what we hope to continue learning more about. And then perhaps most importantly, I'll be giving you all a sense of what it takes to participate in this project. I should pause right there and say, if you're having trouble hearing me, please let me know. And at any point, you can go ahead and put comments in the chat or questions in the chat, and then I'll look at those every so often and try to answer those as we go. And yeah, if you can't see a screen with presentation with the caterpillar on it and some bullet points, make a note in the chat as well. Okay, so just to get started, so this project is about monitoring the ecosystems around us, right? And one of the reasons that's more important than ever is because we know that ecosystems are changing and that the pressures on ecosystems are changing. Of course, we know climate change is ongoing, and the degree of climate change depends on where you live. In some places, it's greater, and in other places, it's a little bit less. No matter where you live, probably don't have to go far to see the signal of urbanization or land use change, deforestation. So we know the world is changing, and at the same time, over the last several years, maybe it's been 6 or 7 years since we've noticed this, there were some alarming reports from various parts of the globe indicating insect declines. Big study on aerial insects in Germany. There's a study in Puerto Rico. There's this handful of studies all about insect declines started coming out, and it raised this question like, oh my gosh, is this a really widespread phenomenon? Is this a big problem? The New York Times went so far as to call it the insect apocalypse 6 years ago. And so what I'll say is that there's definitely cause to be concerned. Is it an insect apocalypse? There's a lot we don't understand yet. And again, one of the challenges is that there's kind of two levels of challenges. First of all, there's not that many places that have been studying insects and done long-term monitoring so that we can even assess a trend. And where that is done, it's kind of in one location, it's done for this group of insects, and somewhere else, someone happens to study a different group of insects. And so it's kind of the information is sort of piecemeal all around. And so what we would ideally like to have is data that are collected across many different types of insects, across many different places over a long period of time. And that would help us understand whether this is really a widespread phenomenon or not. The other reason to be concerned and potentially skeptical is that, of course, if a researcher studied insects for 20 or 30 years at a particular location and found insects pretty much are about the same as they were 30 years ago, That researcher might be able to get the study published somewhere, but it's not really going to draw much in the way of news headlines. So news headlines are typically going to be the subset of findings that are these very extreme, eye-catching, attention-grabbing headlines, like, oh, big insect declines. And so what we need is, again, to have not just people study insects everywhere, but to kind of have equal access to all of those findings. But so that said, there have been these studies, again, half dozen or more studies that all indicate relative to some baseline, if we say 1970 was the baseline, that there are fewer insects than there used to be. Now, in addition to insect decline, there's another layer to how insects might be changing, and that's with respect to the seasonality. So where I am in North Carolina, we've kind of just transitioned out of this this middle photo, and we're starting to look a lot more like the right-hand photo. And depending on where you are in North America, hopefully you're well on your way there as well. So what does this inherent seasonality of temperate ecosystems mean? Well, what it really means, one way to think about uh, the foliage in your forest is that it's basically the base of a food web. That foliage is food for all sorts of arthropods like caterpillars. And of course, only after the trees finish flushing out can caterpillars sort of emerge and will wake up from whatever stage they spent the winter in, perhaps as an egg or a even younger caterpillar. And they can start munching. And there's a standard season, just as there's a standard seasonality to when trees leaf out in the spring, there's a standard seasonality to when the insects come out, especially these insect herbivores. Um, and then later on in the season, as trees start putting secondary compounds into their leaves to protect their leaves from herbivory, the leaves become a little bit less palatable, and the amount of insects tends to drop off later in the summer compared to earlier with those fresher leaves. So there's this seasonality to insects, there's a seasonality to trees. So what happens with climate change? What happens in a warmer spring? If trees start leafing out a little bit earlier, then presumably the insects are coming out earlier as well. Those insects are experiencing the same temperature cues as the trees are. And so we have this question of these potential impacts of global change then. We have not only is it possible that we have insect declines, and we want to know more about that. We want to know where those insect declines are more severe and by how much and what types of insects. But also, we want to have an understanding of how much insects are shifting that seasonal timing. And one reason that some folks might be concerned about the seasonality of insects is if you think about birds, especially small migratory songbirds like this indigo bunting here. And this animation that we're looking at, this animation is actually thanks to millions of observations by amateur bird watchers, right? Just everyday folks who are interested in birds, who happen to submit their observations to this centralized repository, using this mobile app called eBird. And so many birders use eBird that scientists are able to aggregate their observations and build these really cool animations like this, which shows basically, I'm going to rerun it there, that shows on average for a typical week of the year where you expect the species to see. And so as a result, we have a really good understanding for any given year of exactly when indigo buntings are migrating. I have not seen my first indigo bunting in North Carolina yet, but this tells me that really any week now I should expect to see them. Now imagine you're this indigo bunting that's wintering down in Central America, and spring has come earlier in North Carolina. So if spring came earlier and the trees leafed out earlier and the insects came out earlier, but down in Central America, you have no idea, right? So you migrate at what evolutionarily has been a good time to migrate. But in a year of an early spring, it might turn out that the real big peak of insect availability has already passed by the time you have found a mate and built a nest and laid eggs and incubated those eggs. By the time your chicks hatch, perhaps that insect peak has already passed. So I'm a bird ecologist, and this is what got me thinking about insects more and the importance of insect declines and the importance of shifts in insect timing or phenology was from that bird perspective. But unfortunately, there are not as many bug watchers as there are bird watchers, not in the same way, not in the same standardized way. And that really is the generation or the origin of this project I created, Caterpillars Count. And so what I'll tell you about today, I'll tell you about how we conduct surveys. I'll tell you about the various resources we have. I'll show you what the mobile app looks like. At the end, I'll show you some of our data visualization tools. I'll talk about, where this project works best, especially at nature centers and with school groups, but also, it could be in your local city park. It can be in your own backyard if you have good woody vegetation and foliage back there. I won't have a lot of time today to talk much about the learning activities, but these are all linked on our website as well. So I hope at the end of this, some fraction of you will find this project interesting sounding and you'll decide to join us. So let me start. Well, actually, yeah, here's kind of just an overview. Currently, Caterpillars Count sites have been created in over 30 states and provinces. We've got most of Eastern North America pretty well covered. We have a couple of sites starting up in Illinois, I know for sure, this year. So that will get filled in. And Mississippi, I'm hoping, is not far behind as well. In any case, this project can be done anywhere that there is woody vegetation. Honestly, it can be done anywhere in the world. There's no reason it has to be restricted to North America. But of course, that's where we focus most of our outreach and advertising thus far. And yeah, so we've engaged. Actually, this is a minimum estimate in terms of the number of people involved, because this is just the number of people who actually have their name attached to a survey submission, but often that's done in small groups. And so several thousand people we've engaged in surveying well over 100,000 trees or branches and looking at and recording almost 300,000 arthropods. So I actually want to start by just giving you a sense of some of the things that we've learned along the way. And I'm going to go through it somewhat quickly, but basically the first piece, based on the photos that you can see right here, I just want to emphasize that although the project is called Caterpillars Count, it could just as easily be called Bugs on Branches or something like that. So we're not solely focused on caterpillars. Basically, we look at foliage and woody vegetation and we record all the different types of bugs we come across. And the reason the project is called Caterpillars Count is that from that bird perspective, thinking about a migratory bird and how much bird food is out there, caterpillars really do count. Caterpillars really are the most valuable prey in the forest for small songbirds. If you imagine feeding a tiny little chick, 2-day-old chick, something to eat, a nice, soft, juicy caterpillar like this one here on the top right is going to just be really easy to digest compared to something that's got a lot of hard parts like this beetle, which has these hard casings and legs and things like that. So that's why we call the project Caterpillars Count. It really is the most important bird food, but certainly birds rely on all of these things: spiders and caterpillars and leafhoppers, etc. So that said, one of the things we wanted to do when we started this was just to make sure that we felt confident in that volunteers could collect reasonable and high value data. And so we did some comparisons at a particular location in North Carolina, not on the same day, but generally at the same site over the same seasons. trained scientists and volunteer citizen scientists did these same branch surveys. And so we have comparison, and basically we found broadly, both groups found similar types of arthropods. They found in this middle plot similar uh, estimates of the density of those arthropods. So this line up the middle is the one-to-one line. So if everybody had exactly equal estimates of abundance, and each of these symbols is just a different arthropod group color coded by what's on the left there. But broadly, these data points, they're not exactly on the one-to-one line, but they basically center on the one-to-one line. So on average, we're getting very similar estimates of what types of organisms are more abundant or less abundant, depending on whether that estimate was by a trained scientist or a citizen scientist. And then also they produce very similar patterns of seasonality in arthropods. So that gave us lots of confidence that anyone with some basic training can contribute valuable data. As far as some of the other things we've learned, one of the things we already knew, but that we're learning more and more about is that, of course, not all plant species are equal as far as how many arthropods they can support. So this is an example, and I'll show you a follow-up example of this with our data visualization tools on the website. But basically, this just shows for several different tree species at one particular site in North Carolina, how many bugs, how many arthropods of these different types were seen. And so you can see, okay, well, the height of this curve is the total number of bugs, and black gum seems to be the highest there. If we just wanted to focus on caterpillars, we would focus on this magenta color, and it looks like red oak has the greatest number per survey, etc. Right? So different tree species support different amounts of bugs. And you may have heard about this in the context of native versus non-native species, and that's certainly an important distinction. And it is very much true that native species tend to support many more arthropods than non-native species. But what we see here is these are all native species. And so even not all native species are identical. So some might be more valuable if you're thinking in terms of wildlife habitat and the ability to support bird populations, we can rely on these kinds of data. I kind of alluded to this idea of seasonality and understanding how much seasonality is shifting over time, both seasonality and abundance. And what we found by monitoring over multiple years is that there is a tremendous amount of variation. So what we see here is just 3 years of caterpillar seasonality at this North Carolina botanical garden from 2015 to 2017. And you can see in 2015, okay, it seems to be relatively low abundance. The main peak was in mid-June. Relative to 2 years later, the main peak was 2 weeks later, just about. And those 2 weeks could make a big difference in terms of when birds actually have chicks in the nest and when there's going to be a lot of insect food relative to those birds. And 2016, actually, the peak was even later, right? So what we see is a tremendous amount of variability, and I'm just going to add 2 more years on here. So then the following 2 years, you can see 2018 was very similar to 2016. 2019, totally different, back to sort of a mid-June peak and the most caterpillars we've seen in some time. Then 2020 hits, and we have this huge crash in caterpillars. So my main takeaway from this is really just the variability from year to year, and the fact that for me, what this speaks to is the extreme importance in long-term monitoring. Because if you just go out and look at what's happening in one summer, much less one date in the summer, even if you monitored all summer long, but you only went out for one summer, was that a normal year or not? You don't really have a sense of what is normal until you start doing this for 5 or more years, right? And then you get a sense of, oh, this was a high caterpillar year, this was a low caterpillar year, this was an early year or a late year. So we've seen this tremendous amount of variability over these. At this point, we're up to 9 years of sampling at this location. Okay, so again, all this is sort of even more added motivation for this sort of long-term monitoring. That's what we're especially focused on. This is a project where the value of the data increases exponentially as people continue to collect it. So even if people participate only one time, those data can be valuable, certainly for certain questions. But as you continue that data collection, it helps us better understand these long-term trends and the sources of variability. Okay, speaking of trends, and of course, this is one of our motivating factors. This is another snapshot from one of the data visualization pages on the website. You can pull this up for any of the sites that have been collecting data for 3 or more years. You can visualize those trends. And this is for the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And this is for 4 different types of arthropods, each different color there. You can see on average, there's been an average decline over the years that we've been monitoring. That's the slope of those straight lines is sort of the average trend. But of course, the raw data, which is in those faded colors behind, you can see there's lots of ups and downs, right? And so again, we only start getting a picture of the true trend once we've started accumulating several years of data here. Okay, so those are some of the things we've learned. I'll maybe talk about a little bit, a few other things towards the end. But I wanted to shift now to talking a little bit more concretely about what this project looks like to run. And again, as I go, I think inevitably questions will arise. So feel free to drop those in the chat. So first of all, if you want to monitor anything about insects, you want to compare the average amount of insects per branch on one date compared to another date, or from one site to another site. We can't base that on just going out in our backyard and looking at a single branch and saying, okay, well, I looked at a branch, and so here's how I would characterize the insects of my yard. Insects are extremely patchily distributed, right? So you might look at 10 branches and find hardly anything. And then on that 11th branch, you find all sorts of things. So this is an issue of sample size. In order to get a precise estimate of what's going on with the insects, we need to sample enough branches or enough trees to get that picture. And so I'm going to talk about 2 different scenarios of how this project could be implemented. And so the first scenario I'm going to talk about is maybe at a classic nature center, environmental education center, or zoo, something like that, where the project is going to be done presumably with a group of people. And that might be a small group of just 3 or 4 people, or maybe you have 10 or 15 people, coming out for a weekly citizen science walk or something like that. But when you have a number of people, when you have a small group like that, then it's very easy to kind of divide up the labor. It's much easier to achieve that larger branch sample size that will allow us to get a really good estimate of arthropod density. So our suggestion, and I'll show you in a moment, but when you create a caterpillar's count site on our website, you say how many survey trees or how many survey branches you'd like to set up at your site. And what we recommend is that if it's a group like a nature center, that you try to do 30 survey trees. You can basically choose any number in increments of 5. So the way it works, and I'll show you in more detail later on, but basically you can add survey trees in groups of 5, and a single group of 5 trees is referred to as a survey circle, a circle of 5 survey branches. I will be using branch and tree kind of interchangeably. So typically, you're going to have a different survey branch. Every survey branch is probably going to be on a different tree. In some cases, there may be a few cases where you have one giant tree it's really big and it has big drooping branches that span, 10 or 15 meters apart from each other or something like that. Maybe you might put two survey branches on the single tree. For the most part, trees and branches are the same thing. Okay, so as we'll see in a moment, ballpark, if you figure about 5 minutes per survey and you have 30 survey branches, well, that works out to 2.5 person hours. But if you have a group of 5 volunteers, and you split up that work and you each go through each of these groups of survey circles one at a time, then you each have to just do one survey per circle, and then you get through 6 circles, and you can all do that in half an hour, right? So a group of 5 could easily knock out 30 surveys in half an hour. I'll try to keep reiterating that how many trees you set up at your site, how frequently you end up doing surveys is all up to you. So all I'm going to talk about today are recommendations and the benefits of surveying at a certain level or at a certain frequency. So um, if, especially at a nature center, if you're able to do that, on a weekly basis and just get all the volunteers to know, okay, yeah, every Tuesday afternoon, we're going to come out and do this, or every Saturday morning, then that's great. And those data can get used for scientific questions about seasonality, right? And how's the seasonality at your site compared to seasonality at sites farther north or farther south, or at a adjacent, more urban area, or at a more rural area, et cetera, right? So surveying 30 branches weekly throughout the growing season would be terrific. I write May through July here mainly because that's the period that's of greatest concern for those birds. That's when the birds are going to be nesting and trying to feed young. But honestly, you can do this project as long as there's leaves on the tree. So if you're down south and there's leaves on the tree from late March or mid-March through November, then and you have the bandwidth and the interest, then go for it. So again, feel free to survey as long as there's something to survey. Um, on the flip side, and maybe I'll shift over to the example of, well, let's say you're just an interested individual, you want to learn more about bugs, you want to learn more about the biodiversity in your backyard, you're interested in setting up a caterpillar count site. Well, we do have a minimum site size, so it really doesn't make sense to create a site with fewer than 10 survey trees. But again, 5 minutes per survey, that's less than an hour. If you're into this project, want to try it out, if you have a bunch of foliage in your backyard, then you can do that, right? And it might turn out that, you just did it twice over the summer, you didn't really get into a weekly habit. That's fine. Those data are still perfectly useful for lots of different scientific questions. So for example, some of the data I showed you about, how many arthropods on average do we expect on this tree species versus that tree species? Well, if you only participate one time, those data can be used to answer those kinds of questions. They can be used to answer spatial questions of, what's the geographic variation? What's the average number of caterpillars per survey down south in Alabama compared to North Carolina, compared to Michigan, et cetera, right? Um, so what I want to emphasize is that if you participate at any level, you submit data, you conduct surveys, those data can be used for important scientific questions. If you participate at this high level with respect to the frequency of your surveys and maybe a site with 30 or more branches, those data will just get used in even more scientific questions, right? So if that is something that's motivating for you, like, I really want my data to be useful for all these things. If that is motivating for you, that's great. That is a good reason to do more. If it's not motivating for you, that's totally fine. So of course, people are going to participate at whatever level they have the time and interest for. Okay, let's see. So just as an example, so I've presented to you a little bit of data from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And this is just a trail map from the garden. So of course, as many botanical gardens have, they have sort of display gardens, but they also, in the adjacent trail and hillside, there's this yellow streamside trail, which is basically just through the woods. So it's natural vegetation, natural forest here. And arrayed along this half-mile path in yellow, we have our groups of 5 surveys, these red survey circles. Each red circle represents 5 different survey trees, right? And so we would go along, and there's a group of 3 or 4 of us who, in an hour and a half or so, we are able to survey 40 survey branches over using a couple different methods. And so we'll start here, and we'll just work our way around. So that's sort of an example. Here's what it looks like to actually create a site. So first of all, you don't need to get permission. You don't need to email me and ask if it's okay, etc. So you just need to go to the website. It's listed there at the bottom. You need to create an account for yourself. Just use your email address. And once you've created an account, you log in, you go to My Account, create a new site. And then this page on the right is all you need to fill out. Basically, you're going to come up with a site name. If you are a nature center, then that is probably just going to be the name of your nature center. And in which case, if you are an organization, you can put your organizational URL there if you want. If you're just doing this in your own backyard, what I suggest is that you just get creative with that site name. We wouldn't just want to call it Alan's Backyard, because hopefully there are many different people named Alan who might want to do this project in their backyard across North America, right? So come up with something creative and fun and work in your pet's name or whatever you want. But just make sure that it's unique, I guess, is the main question. You'll provide just a really brief kind of one-line description. It might be, this is oak hickory forest along a stream, or a backyard with mainly cultivated plants, or whatever, something along those lines. It kind of gives a sense of what the habitat is like there. And then of course you're going to zoom in on the map, and you're going to drop a pin exactly where your site is centered. Once you do that, you'll select the number of survey plants or survey trees for your site. And as I mentioned, the minimum is 10, and then you can do anything above that in multiples of 5. Nature centers, we hope that you are able to do 30 or more, but if you're not, totally fine. Do whatever you're capable of. And then the last thing to specify before creating that site is a site password. So when you create your own personal account, you're going to create a personal account password. Like, here's how I log into Caterpillar's account. The site password is different. So basically, and again, put yourselves in the position of a nature center or a zoo. If you're going to have multiple visitors contributing data and submitting data, then they need permission to be able to submit that data. And that's going to be given via this site password. So this is a password that you're basically going to share with your volunteers. And so it should probably be something that's really easy to remember and easy to share. So, North Carolina Botanical Garden, right? We'll just make it NCBG or whatever, something we can just pass along to our volunteers. And I'll show you later on, they can enter that into the app one time, and then the app will remember that they have permission to submit data. You can always change that site password later. Once you've created the site, when you log into the website, you can do a few different things, but one of the things that happens automatically is these 3-letter codes, these branch tags, get generated automatically for you. So I'm just showing you branch tags for a site in Acadia National Park in Maine, where they've been running this project for several years. And so this 3-letter code, BQB, when we enter that, when we're submitting data, all we have to do is type BQB, and the app knows, oh, you're in Acadia National Park. You're at Survey Circle 1 at the red branch. And someone at some point realized that that branch is an American mountain ash, and they entered that information. So basically, as soon as you hit create site, these tags will auto-generate minus the species, the plant species name. And you have the option to go in and fill in those plant species names later on before printing the tags and hanging them on your survey branches. Okay, just checking, no questions so far. Again, please feel free to write them in the chat as they occur to you. Now I'm going to shift from setting up a site to conducting surveys. And actually, there are two different methods that you're allowed to choose from when you participate in this project. Once you pick a method, though, we expect you're picking the method that works best for you, and so you're going to just stick with that one method. So you wouldn't alternate methods or anything like that. And so those two methods are beat sheet surveys and visual surveys. So I'm going to just show you videos of each one in action, and you're going to get to see on the side, you'll get to see the app in action as well. So let me go ahead and play this. And the first thing you'll see is the entering of that three-letter branch code in here. So it pops up automatically. It knows where we are. We beat that branch 10 times, and bugs fell out. So we're seeing this caterpillar. So we selected caterpillar. All right, so we decided on the length. We estimated the length of that caterpillar and submitted it, and then added in the ant, estimating the length of that. You can see that these caterpillars have optional checkboxes for whether they're hairy or spiny, or in a leaf roll, or in a silk tent. Right, so you can see the menu of options of the different arthropod types that we observed. Went back and edited an entry. And then the last thing we do is estimate how large was the average leaf in that survey, on that survey branch. So we estimated about 10 centimeters. And then how many leaves were poised over the beat sheet. And we did a really quick count. So the nearest 5 is fine. So we estimated there are about 75 leaves poised above the beat sheet. And then estimated herbivory. Okay, so let's see. Oh, look at all these. I don't know what all those toys are. Let's see. Okay, so that was a beat sheet survey. And well, I'll show you the visual survey, then I'll talk through the pros and cons. Again, we're going to enter that branch code. And you can see the same color pops up in the app. That's a good way to check that you didn't make a typo, that you're in the right place. Did we find any arthropods? Sometimes you don't. I'll talk about that, the importance of that later on. But, oh, look right here. Yes, there's a little leafhopper right there. So we clicked yes, we selected leafhopper. We estimated it to be 9 millimeters. So in this case, you're examining a branch, an area of exactly 50 leaves, and the associated twigs and petioles and branch of around those 50 leaves. And you're looking on both the upper and lower surfaces. You are making sure not to disturb the branch too much. That's a little leafhopper nymph. You don't want to disturb the branch too much as you go, because that might disturb arthropods. They might fly away or drop off the branch. Um, oh, so that was it. That was what was found on that one. Then again, we estimate the average leaf length because this is a visual survey, and the protocol for a visual survey is literally to examine 50 leaves. That's the number that will appear here. Is that number of leaves 50? So you won't be able to edit that because it's be expected that that's what you did. And then that last piece is estimating herbivory. That is, maybe you might not have even seen any bugs at all, but you noticed that there were some parts of leaves that were chomped. And so you can record that in this herbivory score. We'll see an example of that later on. Okay, so as far as the pros and cons of these two approaches, I would say the beat sheet approach um, for engaging the public, especially for engaging younger audiences, although you obviously will still need to have adults who are overseeing the data submission. But beat sheets are just fun, more fun. They are faster. They're more immediate. They're easier in the sense that it's easier to spot bugs on a white sheet than it is uh, cryptically colored bugs on the branch itself. Um, so I think there are a lot of advantages for going the beat sheet route. The main disadvantage is that you need a beat sheet. And now the beat sheets that you saw in that example, uh, it's my own patented design. It's $5 of material. It's just 2 by 2 foot of white cloth, really cheap white fabric, stapled. We have instructions on our website if you want to make them. But making them is not the only issue. Sometimes if you're a nature center and you're coordinating volunteers, and it can be logistically difficult, like coordinating, like getting the beat sheets from one set of volunteers to another week to week and that sort of thing. So some folks certainly elect um, not to use that. And that's the main pro of a visual survey, right? Is that you don't really need any special equipment. And although you could see in those videos, you could see what it's like to use a mobile app, you don't have to use a mobile app. So we have paper data sheets that are linked on our website as well. And you can write things down on those paper data sheets. And so you don't need anything, right? I mean, you can print out a data sheet in advance and just go to the forest and write what you find. It means later on someone is going to have to enter those data, which is one of the reasons we do recommend people use the app if they have a choice, because A, it will save them time, but B, also if they misenter a number, then the app will automatically prompt them and be like, "Are you sure about that?" That's it. And the person will be right there in front of the branch, so they can double check um, whatever the unusual value that was getting flagged is. Whereas if you write it all down on paper, um, and then you a couple days later go to submit it on the website, uh, at that point it might flag, but you're no longer there to double check. You can't see it in front of you. But in any case, the visual surveys, as I said, um, not great, especially for younger participants or anyone who would have trouble both for vision purposes or patience purposes for carefully examining exactly 50 leaves on a branch, looking for organisms that have undergone millions of years of evolution to uh, avoid detection by visual predators, right? So again, many of these things will be somewhat cryptically positioned on those branches. So you really have to be careful when you're doing visual surveys. Regardless, so that said, once you understand those pros and cons, you can decide what might work best for you or your site, and just pick a method and stick with it. Okay, let me dig into. Still, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I think that once someone starts posting, a lot of times the floodgate opens up. But maybe it just means I'm being more coherent than usual today. I'm not sure. So we saw you could see this in the video, this app design. If you want to just play and practice with the mobile app, again, you need a Caterpillar's Count account before you can practice with it. But if you download the mobile app, once you log in, it's going to ask you, okay, what branch are you at? You can just use this test code. EJR is for like our test branch example, this example site. Um, and the site password is just the word test, lowercase. And so you can just see what the app looks like and practice and go through the different pages of it. Um, at this point, I should mention, um, although we have a version of this app for both iPhone and Android, our Android app right now ran into some issues, and we're in the process of republishing that app. So it probably won't be available for another 2 weeks. Um, if you have an Android phone and would be willing to help us, we actually need 20 testers. This is just something that the Android or the Google Play Store requires now. Before you can release a new version, is you need to have demonstrated that you had 20 people test it. So actually, all of you, by virtue of being in this webinar today, have been added to our email list. You can, of course, unsubscribe yourself later if you want. But tomorrow, I'll be sending out our April newsletter. And in that, you'll see instructions for how you can help us join the Android test. Okay, I see a couple questions coming up here. Most of the trees in our yard have branches too high to ground. Yeah. So absolutely, that's a big limitation, is that you can only do this project on branches that you can reach. They have to be at eye level. And so basically, if you're only in a place with trees where the branches only start at 20 feet up, you can't really do the project there. You have to find an area with saplings or shrubs or some understory vegetation. That also raises a really important question about the how we interpret these data. And I just wanted to mention that something that we do here in North Carolina, we've been doing for several years, to give us confidence that our estimates of caterpillar abundance down at eye level, at ground level, 2 meters off the ground, um, are reflective of what's going on way up in the canopy, where most of the foliage in a forest is much higher up. So what we do is we put out these little traps that catch the falling caterpillar frass or caterpillar poo that's raining down. As caterpillars up in the canopy are munching those leaves, they're pooping out little pellets of dried up tree material. And so we catch that caterpillar frass and we can check to confirm that the seasonality of caterpillar frass matches the seasonality of caterpillars we're actually finding low down on tree branches. And where we've done this, we find pretty good match. Although it may not be true everywhere, it's important to do that comparison. But in any case, that's what allows us some confidence that as long as you can find some vegetation down at eye level, that it is absolutely worthwhile data to collect. Another question, can your satellite trees be non-native trees or horticultural variety trees? That's a great question. And that actually gets to a point I didn't really get into, but let's look at that picture. Oops. Yeah, that picture here. So in each of these survey circles of 5 trees, there's one central tree and then 4 satellite trees around it, right? And the idea is, again, as the first commenter pointed out, like, oh, in this area, all of our trees, the branches are too high, we can't do it. So the first step, if you want to set up a site, is figuring out where do we have foliage that is accessible, where on our site. And once you kind of map out, okay, well, there's all this area, or we could just focus on sampling this area, et cetera. You're going to decide on an area, you're going to decide on a number of survey branches to put out there. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of subjectively, based on where the foliage is available, say, okay, well, there's a bunch of foliage over here. Let's put a survey circle over here. And you're going to kind of tag a tree in the center of that area as your center tree. And like I said, that's kind of subjectively chosen. But then your satellite trees will ideally be chosen. What you're going to do is you're going to walk 5 meters in each cardinal direction and just use the first tree you come to that has um, enough leaves on it. And in that way, if you subjectively choose the center of all these things, but you more systematically or in this standardized way choose your satellite trees, then that means that you're going to get pretty much a statistically representative sample of the type of vegetation present at your site. And so whether those are native or non-native trees, um, it's it's uh, it's kind of just what's there is what we want to sample. And now it might be the case, um, some sites may in particular want to do a comparison between certain tree species. As long as those are really abundant tree species, I think that's totally fine. If you want to do something more structured, then you have the flexibility to do that. But if you don't care and if it's all the same to you, then I suggest using this kind of two-tiered approach to choosing your sampling trees. First, just subjectively choose the center of a survey circle, and then systematically choose those 4 satellite trees. The other thing I'll mention, though, this is all hypothetical or ideal, I guess. Um, in the real world, oftentimes maybe you don't have a lot of vegetation to choose from. Maybe the understory is very open. There's only so many trees with branches at eye level, and or maybe those are arrayed along a forest edge or something like that. If you can't arrange these in these little cross arrange a layout, and all 5 of your branches, if it works best for you to lay them out in a line, basically, that's totally fine. So like along a trail, basically if you're just following along a trail and you just want to arrange your branches 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's fine. But you can still, if you choose the center one first, and then you just walk in either direction 5 meters and pick the first satellite tree, and then extend 5 more meters beyond that satellite tree to get the next satellite tree, right? And so again, that will still give you a representative sampling of the tree species present at your site. And then the last question I see on here is how to safely return caterpillars to a tree. Does it matter exactly where they go? Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great question. So when we do a beat sheet survey and we get all of those bugs in the beat sheet, caterpillars really are the only group that we take care to place back on that survey branch. Most other things can either fly or they're pretty mobile and they're able to get where they need to go. But caterpillars really are kind of the least mobile of our arthropods, and they're very often very dependent on a particular host plant. So we want to put the caterpillar back on the branch, and if it's just a regular soft green caterpillar, then you can just pick it up with your fingers and plop it down. If it's a hairy one, then you probably want to not touch it and maybe just wedge a leaf under it and kind of transfer it. It doesn't matter. As long as it's back on that branch somewhere, it doesn't matter where on the branch you put it. So that's a great question. Okay, let me quickly skip through back. We've looked at the app. Oh, so you saw a little bit of this in action. Something that you couldn't see in the video was that when you do see a caterpillar or a cool looking bug in our app, you have the option. So let's say you see a beetle, you estimate its length, you have the option to take a photo, right? So you can take a photo of this and submit that photo with your survey. And you can take, in your survey, you came across 5 different bugs, you can include 5 different photos with that survey submission. Those photos automatically get submitted to, at the moment, they get submitted to the Caterpillars Count iNaturalist account. And for those of you unfamiliar with iNaturalist, it's a terrific platform for crowdsourcing the identification of any cool organism that you might see and find and snap a photo of. There's lots of other features to it. But the great thing about sending that photo to iNaturalist is that other iNaturalist users will look at that photo, they'll maybe agree, oh, that's not just a ladybug, or it's not just a beetle, it's an Asian lady beetle. And so we'll get a finer level identification. than we're asking people to kind of submit. That's something I didn't spend time on. I glossed over that, but just to explicitly state that the level of identification we ask our users is kind of roughly at this level of taxonomic order. So can you distinguish a beetle from a caterpillar, from a spider, from a bee or a wasp, from an aphid, etc.? There are a few groups that if you haven't spent much time looking at bugs before, there are probably a few new groups that might be a little bit tricky at first to learn, but presumably, well, not presumably, we have resources which I'll show you in a little bit to help you feel confident in being able to identify those. Um, so, but the advantage of taking a photo, and we highly recommend taking photos of caterpillars, especially, if nothing else. Take photos of caterpillars because we can really, it helps us to better understand what types of caterpillars are out there at different times of year. And caterpillars, they do count after all. Okay, so then back to this last part of submitting a survey is estimating the leaf length, and then as I mentioned before, you're going to report what's the average level of herbivory, or how holy and how chewed up were those leaves. And one way to think about this is that if you just did a 50 leaf visual survey, 5% of 50 leaves is 2.5 leaves. So if you were to visually in your mind take all those little chewed holes and smush them together mentally, if you had more than 2.5 leaves worth of leaf hole, then that would bump you up out of the trace category and into the light category. And if likewise, if you had more than 5 leaves worth of holes, and that would be honestly a lot of chewed up leaf, then that would put you out of the light category and into the moderate category, right? Like if every leaf had pretty significant damage, etc. So that's one way to think about estimating that. Okay, so let me actually break here, and I'm going to show off some resources. Can you all just let me know in the chat to make sure that you can see my browser screen that has the Caterpillars Count website on it right now? Someone give me a thumbs up or a chat, or a thumbs down if you can't see my browser. You can see it, great. So if you go to Learn, there's an identification skills page. So here we have a few different links. We have an arthropod ID guide. This is something you can print out double-sided to give people, and you could laminate this or not. But some of the most common types of arthropods you run across on branches with some tips for identifying them and a ruler. We have a photo ID quiz, which you can take, and it just gives you a photo. You can just practice, and you can take this multiple times, and it's different each time. But probably the most useful thing is this virtual survey. And so this, let me full screen it. It gives you a sample branch, and then there's some bugs on here. Oh, this one is timely. Hopefully everyone knows we're embracing the cicada apocalypse or whatever we're calling it this year. So that actually, this is an image of a periodical cicada, which is in the leafhoppers and cicadas group here. And if I'm to estimate its length based on, well, this is a good question. Based on this ruler, if this was put in right, we should not include the length of the wings or antennae or legs. So it really, the length we're estimating is head to body length, and the body ends right here. That doesn't mean I'm confident that whoever scored this in the game did it properly, but they might have included the wings. We'll find out. Let's see. They said 15. I think they included the wings in that estimate. But that's okay. That's a good learning point of learning for you all. In any case, I successfully identified it. I didn't get all the points I should have because the the key for its length, actual length is wrong, but that's okay. And then I can keep looking around. What else do we have on here? That looks like a grasshopper or a cricket. And so this, I mean, this really is the app format over here on the right. I was off by 1 millimeter here, but otherwise I did pretty well. And then let's just say that's all I see. It shows me I missed something up here. And then the next branch, the branches get a little bit harder and a little bit harder to pick out visually. So it's good for both practicing finding bugs, cryptically positioned on a branch. It's good for practicing your IDs, and it's good for practicing estimating length, which are the three things you have to do in a survey. And then at the end of it, you get an overall score, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely try out the virtual survey game. And if you do that while logged into your account, it'll kind of keep track of your best score and that kind of thing. So those are some of the resources we have available. Let me see. Now I guess I'll shift over to some of the data visualization tools we have. So on the Explore tab, there's this Maps and Graphs page. And the Maps and Graphs page, well, at the top is a leaderboard, a site leaderboard, just for fun more than anything else. By default, it's just going to show you in the current year, but in the current year, it being mid-April, there's only 3 sites in the South that have submitted surveys so far, because for most places, they haven't quite leafed out enough. If we can change that to see what are the sites that have seen the most caterpillars per survey branch, or that is the frequency of survey branches with at least one caterpillar. Overall, all time. So there's a site in Wisconsin, site in the North Carolina mountains, etc. So anyway, this is just for fun more than anything else. You can switch it to be the leaderboard by user, and you can see, what users all time have found the highest proportion or had caterpillars on the highest proportion of surveys. And good old Kaylee Hankins there, but she's only ever done 12 surveys. I mean, come on. But Charlotte, you got to hand it to Charlotte. 36% of her 1,300 branch surveys. Amazing. That's a lot of caterpillars that Charlotte has seen. Who I've never met. I believe she does one of those Wisconsin sites. Okay, so anyway, the leaderboard, that's really just fun and bragging rights. But the data exploration is down below. So here we have a map, and a map shows the location of all the caterpillar count sites. And by default, they're color-coded in varying shades of green, which is reflecting, on average, it's that percent of caterpillars. It's that site leaderboards ranking, basically. It's like, so basically, sites in the brighter green have a higher percentage of surveys with caterpillars, and darker green have fewer. But you can change the map. So if you want to look at spatial patterns of spiders instead, and instead of percent of surveys, you just want density, the number per survey. So we can change that. We can select certain years or certain months or certain tree species to restrict our observations to. And you can see we have pretty high spider density in a lot of places, very low spider density here in Minnesota. Who knows? That could just be a small sample size effect. In any case, we can play with the map. We can visualize spatial patterns that way. But probably more useful is zooming in to one particular site and digging into the data at that site. So I'm going to click on the North Carolina Botanical Garden. Again, just for fun, we have our site leaderboard. So this is just for the people who have done surveys here at this site. Boy, I'm barely hanging on to the top 10 here, which is no good. That's just bragging rights again. Down below, we have, by default, it's showing you the seasonal patterns from the previous year. And so you can see caterpillars, actually caterpillar phenology was much more up and down compared to the examples I showed you in the presentation earlier. We can go back to compare, we can add another line. And this is what we're really excited about with our data visualizations is that we can compare caterpillar abundance and density between different years. On this page, we can add, it doesn't have to be caterpillars. We can compare between different taxonomic groups. So beetles, there are way more beetles than caterpillars on average, but they also peaked at a different time of year, etc. So lots of potential for doing comparisons between sites, between types of bugs, between years. Our second type of visualization is this: what kinds of bugs are there? The composition tab. And what I showed you before was this one, which is broken down by plant species. And we can change, the default is just of all of the insects or arthropods seen in a given year, what percent were of each of these different types. So everything sums to 100%. But we can also change it to be the number per survey, which is, I think, what I showed you earlier. We can change that estimate to biomass per survey, etc. We estimate that biomass from your estimates of length. We can convert that to a biomass. The other thing we can do, instead of visualizing it by plant species, we can break it down just by month of the year to compare all of the different bug types over the seasons. We can compare from one site to another. So again, that's the botanical garden. How does that compare to, let's say, where are we? Acadia National Park. And interesting. So Acadia National Park has way more moths, adult butterflies and moths, compared to what we see at the Botanical Garden. A similar, maybe slightly smaller amount of caterpillars. So that's interesting right there. So you can keep adding and comparing sites. And then the third tab for data visualization here are those long-term trends. And again, just like everything, you can add new arthropod groups and compare trends. You can compare trends for the same group at different sites, et cetera, et cetera. So, and of course, in order to visualize a trend, a site must have at least 3 years of data. So if you're just starting off, you're not going to be able to use the trend feature for your site quite yet. Okay, a new question. For a focus currently is on trees, but many perennials and shrubs are amazing host plants for caterpillars and other arthropods. So again, the origin of this project and the data that we're, or at least one angle with respect to why we're collecting these data, is we're trying to understand seasonal patterns and long-term trends in bird food. And so we're focused on where birds, foliage gleaning birds, are foraging. And so that's why we're focused on woody vegetation, first of all. So this isn't something that's done in an herbaceous meadow or in your garden. And that's why we're focused on trees and shrubs. And that's why we're hoping to have sort of representative vegetation of typically forested habitat. So certainly if you have perennials and shrubs, you can absolutely include those in your branch surveys if they're part of your site, if you want to do those in your backyard. But that's why we're focused on the types of plants that we are focused on. So we're not likely to expand outside of woody vegetation in the near future, because that really requires kind of a different sampling method. That's a great question, though. The last thing, no, I'll probably say the last thing like 5 more times. The next thing I want to show you is some resources we have. Actually, they're under the Participate tab. And so this is where we have, and we have a bunch of these linked. Hopefully, most of you grabbed that tinyurl.com link from the beginning of the presentation. But again, it mainly points to things that you can just find if you go straight to this resources page. Just a bunch of resources and documents that you could use for, training participants, some kind of tips and guides for what to emphasize for people if you were going to teach volunteers at your site, for example, how to do this project. More information on how to set up a new site and how to select those branches. We have, I mentioned, you can test out the app, and there's kind of instructions for using the app for the first time and testing it on that test branch. I mentioned we have instructions for how to build your own beat sheet on here, kind of what materials to buy step by step. It's pretty easy. If you want to use a paper data sheet, we have those linked here, and instructions for filling that out. Instructions for exploring those data visualization tools further. Instructions for exploring the data. Actually, that's one thing I'll show right now is once you have submitted data, you can go and click on My Account. Here's that Create New Site button. Here's Manage My Site if you wanted to print out your branch tags or fill in the plant species names. Manage My Surveys is for looking at data that have been submitted for your site and potentially even editing them if you need to. Now, because I am the manager of this entire project, I see all of these things. You're not going to see this long set of sites. You'll just see a single link for your site here. But basically, what you'll see is, oh, here were all the most recent surveys. And what we see here is what I'm seeing, since I'm a manager for everything, is I'm seeing these surveys that were submitted from South Carolina, Tallahassee Island. And from branch IVX by Karen, she did a visual survey. The survey branch, had this herbivory and that leaf length. And if I click on those arthropods, I can see what she reported. She reported 3 2-millimeter ants, 1 small aphid, 1 small unidentified thing. And so if you're a site manager and you have volunteers and they're out all day, and at the end of the day, you talk to them and they're like, oh yeah, man, weren't those crickets crazy? And they were so big. And you're like, oh, I don't remember seeing any crickets. And then in discussing, you realize that what that person was calling a cricket was actually a cicada or something like that, right? You realize, oh, there were some errors. Well, you can come in here and manage my surveys, and you can edit by clicking that little edit button. You can change any of these values and fix problems that you realize later on. If you are the site manager, then you can go back in and edit any of the surveys that have been submitted for your site at any time. If you are, let's say you run a nature center program that gets volunteers, and you have a set of volunteers who are not the site owner, they're just a site contributor. They themselves can come back if they realize they made a mistake. They can come back and edit their own surveys for about 2 weeks, at which point it kind of locks in for them and they can no longer edit it. And that's mainly, we have to do that because otherwise, if the whole database is unendingly editable, then anybody could come in and mess with it at some point in the future. And so we want to restrict that access to just site managers. So whoever created the site, or you can, actually that's another useful thing for me to show right now and we're about to wrap up for questions here in just a moment, but let me show you one more piece of functionality, which is that in these maintenance tools, first of all, your site, presumably you're only going to have one site. One site's going to automatically show up there, so you don't have to select it. It'll be there. But here are the main things you can do. I mentioned you can fill in the names of the plant species of your survey branches if you know them, or maybe get a friend who is good with plants to go around with you and help you fill some of those in. But let's say you created the site, but you're not actually going to be doing the day-to-day. One of your staff members is going to be overseeing it. You can come in here and you can add a new site manager that gives them that administrative capability. All they need is to have created a Caterpillar's Count account. And once they've done that, then they'll tell you, okay, I've done it. And they tell you which email address they use to do it. You just add their email address and you give them, and now they have that administrative capability of managing the site, editing the survey branches, managing the surveys, and that sort of thing. Okay. Well, there may be other things that come up in questions, but let me switch back to the presentation here, just for um, a last point of something that we provide at the end of every season, actually at the end of every year. Um, we put together an annual site report for that kind of summarizes what was found at your site, so you get sent this automatically. And they can be found online. You can browse examples of those reports online. But basically, it gives you a summary of how many people participated and how many surveys were done, and that fun sort of user leaderboard. It also provides some example graphs um, for the phenology of caterpillars or other bugs. It shows you how your site will always be in yellow, and how you compare to like the top 10 sites in terms of percent caterpillars and things like that. And do I have it on here? I don't, but I mentioned that, when you take photos, those photos go to iNaturalist and they get finer identifications. So a summary of all of the species identifications from your site will get put at the end of this annual site report as well. So it's just it's just a PDF document that you can essentially share and email out to people, or include um, in your annual reports to kind of summarize outreach events and things like that. I think that was all of the material that I plan to go through. So what I will say right now is that our email address, if you do have questions, and let me put it in the chat for one last time, which is this tiny URL. If you missed it at the start of the webinar. So that has just kind of an outline and summary of all the things I went through today. It's kind of got the quick links to get to all the things that I've talked about are on our website somewhere, but I know we have stuff is sometimes it feels hidden, or it's not where you expect it to be, etc. So if you can't find it, that might help you. There's a frequently asked questions page as well. And, if after perusing all that stuff, you still have questions, or maybe there's some special circumstance or scenario you want to ask about, feel free to email caterpillarscount@gmail.com. And I'm absolutely happy to help. But so I think I'll stop there and see if there are any other questions people had along the way about setting it up, training people, doing the surveys themselves, what to do with the bugs. All of these have been good. And if you prefer to just ask, you can, instead of typing in the chat, you're welcome to just unmute and ask your question as well. Okay, well, I'll stick around for a few minutes in case someone is just being shy. Oh, wait, here we got a couple. There's no acceptable list of trees and shrubs. So it really is what is available. That is what is available on your landscape, right? And I guess what I can show, I'm still sharing my screen. Let me go in here. So we set if we go in here and edit survey plants, and here's a site, and you can see, okay, this is going to be NA or blank when you first create your site. That was chokecherry. So when you start typing oak, there is going to be there is a drop-down list. So this is we have a list of common trees and shrubs. And this will help if you select from the drop-down, it'll help prevent typos and things like that, and using accepted names, because of course the problem with common names is there's different spellings and spacings and all of that. But this isn't intended to be, you can only do plant species off this list because, again, you might have some interesting ornamental plant that's not on here. You're welcome to survey it as long as you know what it is. You can type it in. Every year or so, we kind of review this, and so maybe eventually we'll add it to our drop-down list. Um, so non-native trees are okay, absolutely. I mean, again, think first about where are you planning to do this project? What area are you trying to characterize? And if there's so what I would say is that if there's a natural area nearby, a state park, a city park, a nature center, a wooded backyard, that's the kind of area really that we want. That's where the data we're thinking about birds and where they're foraging. That's the kind of habitat we want to collect data for. Um, and in those places, they're very well. I mean, certainly we have a number of non-native trees that are spreading in the understory in various places. If that's what's there, that's what's there, and so do that. If you are in like a really cultivated garden and it's all ornamentals, like I wouldn't do this project in a botanical garden in the display garden part of it. So if everything is going to be non-native and ornamental, okay, there's maybe some value. It's sort of interesting, but it's not really what the spirit of the project is. Um, so um, selecting trees along the trail. Um, so yeah, so the main idea is just if you don't have, let me stop the share so that you cancel out of this. Sorry, so you can actually see me while I'm talking. Keep forgetting. Um, there we go. Um, so yeah, if you don't, if the only available foliage is kind of arranged linearly, then by all means, you can put all of your survey branches in a row. They're still going to be in groups of five. They're still going to be in these circles. Like that's just how they're organized in the database is groups of five. And so there's in each group of five, there's a red, a blue, a yellow, a green, a purple. Um, but what we would like to get is the representative vegetation that is present in this area that you've kind of identified that you want to characterize. And so the way we get that is not by saying, oh, this looks like a good tree. Oh, this looks like a good tree. Oh, this looks like a good tree for every tree branch, but instead, okay, this looks like a good area with trees. Okay, now I'm going to walk 5 meters, and the first tree that I run into, I'm going to put my a survey branch tag on that. And if you have to arrange them linearly, then that's fine. Um, maybe just choose along that linear area. Say, okay, here's the branch in the center. I'm going to choose subjectively just because it's in the center. But now in either direction, I'm going to work 5 meters out and find the first thing I come to, and then 10 meters out, find the first thing I come to, and then go in the opposite direction, 5 meters and 10 meters. So that now you have five branches. They're all 5 meters apart in a line. And that would be one survey circle that you put out linearly. Um, Okay, great. Yeah, and the Virginia Master Naturalists have been very active in this. So we have Virginia is one of our best, probably one of our top three participating sites, which is great. Um, as far as those three-letter codes, those are determined automatically when you create your site. They will be provided to you, and you'll see them when you go into Manage My Sites and you go to print your tags. It'll print out that sheet, which you'll then have to cut out, and you can either laminate them, laminate each individual tag, or the much cheaper way to do it, I just use clear packing tape, and so those tags are designed to fit inside clear packing tape, which you fold over on itself, and then you can hole punch that tape and hang it from a tree or something. So yeah, so you'll go to Manage My Sites to see those three-letter codes that you have. Before more people hop off, I just wanted to thank you all for participating. To reiterate that I'm excited to help you all if you are trying to get this off the ground near you, I really should mention this is an exciting year if you happen to be living in a place with the periodical cicadas this year, because something that was found by researchers they published just last year actually is that in years where there's a gazillion cicadas, of course, that's a tremendous amount of extra bird food. And so the birds are gorging themselves silly. It's so easy to find cicadas. Why bother looking for anything else? And therefore, caterpillars experience release from predation. The birds are not eating as many caterpillars as normal. So this is probably, in addition to being really interesting from just a pure cicada perspective, an interesting year cicada-wise, it should be an interesting year caterpillar-wise in places with cicadas as well. There's the chance to see more than typical. So hopefully that's some extra incentive if you happen to be living in one of those many um, regions. But with that, so I'll thank you all. I'll still hang around for another minute or two if people have more questions, but feel free to sign off. Thanks for joining us today.